I had to really look at myself and identify what was driving those types of behaviors. And it all came to fruition on that third day, standing in front of 15 people, crying in front of them and being hugged and being told that they love me. And I'm thinking to myself, love me? They don't love me. Like, they've only known me 3 days. Like, what are they talking about? So there was this level of skepticism and objection and rejection of it at the same time. But I have to say, from that moment on, it really did break me open.
I think this is such an important conversation, and it's one that I'm not sure if you know my story, but I actually got deep into the throes of alcohol abuse, which kind of peaked about 2.5 years ago at this point. And it was amazing how quickly I slipped into it. I shouldn't say slipped. That's probably not the best. That's probably not accurate. I don't think it does. I don't think it's taking as much responsibility as I should have. I'll say it that way.
Got it.
But it was a challenge, man. It was a real challenge. I know a lot of guys are dealing with this.
And how are you doing now?
Oh, great. Yeah, great. Unfortunately, something catastrophic needed to happen for me to get to that point, and ended up with leading to a divorce and the breakdown of a marriage that, was 18 years. So, I think one of the questions a lot of guys have is, does it need to become catastrophic before we start to change?
It definitely doesn't. And I would submit that millions of guys are walking around and the alcohol that they are consuming is compromising their quality of life, but they are either unconscious to it or they're conscious to it and they convince themselves that it's not that big of a deal. And so they procrastinate on making a choice about it. They numb themselves with the alcohol, convincing themselves that 2 or 3 drinks a night isn't that bad. And it's not like they're waking up in a ditch. It's not like they're getting a DUI. It's not like they're getting arrested. And so therefore, my alcohol consumption is socially acceptable. It's fine. The reality is that we know that alcohol is attractively packaged poison. And if we're just a little bit irritable in the morning, that shows up where we snap at our wife or our husband. We're not as present with our children. It compromises our business and career. We're operating at about a 6 out of 10 instead of an 8 or a 9 out of 10. That can mean a loss of income. That can mean we don't generate hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars in our business because we didn't make that additional call or we didn't have that strategy. So it doesn't have to get to rock bottom like it sounds like you may have experienced to some degree, Ryan, in order for alcohol to be severely compromising our lives.
It was, to your point, it was amazing to me that when I stopped drinking, I would say probably within a matter of 1.5 to 2 weeks, I started to not question, but I was surprised. I was amazed at how much time I recaptured through the day. I was done by noon with all of my quote unquote normal work. That was my drunk level of work. And I was done and I'm like, well, what do I do now? And I started doing projects around the house and started, fulfilling commitments that I had made personally and professionally. And the income started to elevate, but it was amazing how much time I lost that I just was not even aware of, and the energy level with it as well.
Yeah, most of us are drinking a seemingly innocent drink or two at nighttime, and we go to sleep, and that compromises the quality of our sleep. We don't spend as long in that deep REM restorative phase of sleep. We're essentially clocking in for a night's work when we have any amount of alcohol close to bedtime, but we don't want the body to be working during the night. We want the body to be resting. And so what happens is we show up the next morning irritable, frustrated, sluggish, sloppy. And so what do? We then try to get ourselves a little pick-me-up. We reach for a sugary croissant or a bagel. We put some cream in our coffee. We drink a Gatorade. We have a Kit Kat chocolate bar just to kind of get an energy boost. And then, of course, that puts in really crappy calories. And then we have a sugar spike and then a crash. And then we're tired and lethargic, and now we don't make great choices throughout the day in our business or in our career, and we get sloppy. And now we're operating at a 6 or 7 out of 10, dragging our ass looking forward to 5 or 6 o'clock when we can drink another glass of attractively packaged poison to try and give us some illusionary relief. And then what does that do? It creates more stress, more anxiety, more poor night's sleep, and then the perpetual vicious cycle continues. And so, yes, the experience of folks who finally figure out how to quit alcohol and stay quit buy back so much time, so much clarity, focus, energy, so they can be more connected to their wife or their husband, more connected to their children, make better strategic choices in their career.
What do you say to the guy, and this is one thing I often hear, because I've been fairly public about the struggles that I had, and inevitably I met with a litany of guys who say, well, you know, if you can't have one drink and can control yourself, you know, you're not a man, or that's the problem, or these types of things. And I know these are individuals who like to have a drink or like to unwind or like to relax. And do what you want. For me personally, I've decided I'm not going to drink at all. But what do you say to these individuals?
Well, I would say to the people who are encouraging their friends to drink when their friends don't want to, grow up. Literally.
Well, they're not friends. These are social media people. So I just want to be clear, because sometimes the two get conflated. And I have friends and I have followers, and those are different.
Yeah. Look, respect anyone's choice. Whether they're drinking alcohol or they're not drinking alcohol. Stop trying to encourage people to man up and have a drink. It is a lazy, lazy, lazy argument, okay? The reality is this: no amount of alcohol is good for us. There is a cultural change that is going on now, okay? And increasingly, people are turning their backs on alcohol. Here's what I would suggest, or here's what I would submit. We do not need alcohol to create camaraderie. We don't need alcohol to have a good time. We don't need alcohol to create a bond between a whole bunch of guys. We don't need alcohol to watch the Super Bowl. We can just create a bond without the alcohol. We can watch the Super Bowl without the alcohol. We can create romance without the alcohol. We can do it. It's just laziness if we're thinking that we can't, or we don't even attempt it. And so when you have chosen to go alcohol-free, I see a lot of people mistakenly going into social situations like this. Oh, yeah, sorry, no, I can't drink. Oh, no, I'm sober. Oh, I wish I could, but I'm doing this 30-day challenge. And oh, no, sorry. Yeah, I wish I could have a drink. And so what you're doing in that situation is that you are unconsciously and consciously telling yourself that not drinking equals pain and deprivation, and drinking equals fun. I submit it's the other way around. Not drinking is fun, and drinking is pain. Now, I get why we feel it's the other way, because there are smiling assassins all throughout society. And a smiling assassin is anyone who's smiling as they offer you a drink. It's the waiter or the waitress who says, "Hi, Ryan, can I get you started with a drink? Would you like a glass of wine? Can I get you something from the drinks menu?" And Ryan, if you're being very hospitable and you've got friends coming over to your house, you want to be a great host, of course. And so you'll say, "Hey, James, can I get you a wine? Can I get you a beer? What can I get you?" And you're smiling as you offer me this attractively packaged poison. And so, of course, we all walk around associating alcohol with pleasure and fun and joy and connection. And we've been doing it for hundreds of years, but not anymore. It's 2025. We're putting a stop to it. And the reality is that you can be hospitable without offering me poison. You can go to a restaurant and a bar, walk up confidently and order a soda water ice and a piece of lime with a big smile on your face. You can make fun of yourself for being alcohol-free, and your friends who are drinking won't care. They'll laugh along with you and go, "Okay." And now everyone can just relax and have a good time.
Yeah, I've heard that alcohol is the only drug or poison, essentially, that if you don't consume it, people think something's wrong with you.
Well, it's the only drug where you have to justify not consuming it.
Right. That's right.
It's
it is
ridiculous.
kind of, it really is interesting. Or oftentimes I think people, and I haven't personally experienced this, but others that I've heard from say if they tell their friends, you know, I don't drink, then their friends automatically assume, oh, that's an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Or that's somebody dealing with something that they can't control themselves. And that might be true, but I don't think it's exclusively true or universally true.
Yeah, I have a lot of members who go through our 90-day stop drinking process, and I talk about this in my book, Clear, which is people have this fear that if they stop drinking and they communicate that to people, that people are going to automatically think, oh, he's got a drinking problem. Oh, he must be an
Right.
alcoholic.
Right.
And so that prevents them from stopping drinking in the first place because they have this fear of being ostracized from the group or being judged. The reality is that nobody cares if you drink or not. They just care if you are pleasant to be around. And if you are fun and you are open and engaging while choosing to be alcohol-free, you can have the most fun, be the most engaging. And people will just respond to that and go, okay, great. And secretly, probably the people encouraging you to have a drink probably wish that they could either reduce their alcohol consumption or quit entirely themselves, and they're looking at you with admiration.
You know, we often hear as alcohol being this quote unquote social lubricant. What kind of conversations are you having with individuals who would tell themselves they're more introverted, or maybe they feel a little bit more uptight in social settings, and they use alcohol as a social lubricant to allow themselves to, like you said, enjoy the experience, let down their guard a little bit, maybe potentially be, at least in their eyes, a little more pleasant, et cetera, et cetera?
I'm aware that there are millions of introverts out there who are doing that, but the consequences of drinking poison to try to relax a little bit are dire. Sure, it gives you short-term confidence, maybe it relaxes you in the short term, but the long-term consequences is like death by 1,000 cuts. There was a study out of the UK in 2022 which showed that even one seemingly innocent drink per night was enough to cause some level of grey and white matter brain degeneration. Now that should be a wake-up call for everyone, just one standard.
Right.
And those claims that came out in the 80s that a glass of wine a day was good for your heart health have been debunked so many times over the last 3 decades.
I was actually going to ask you about that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. In fact, there was a study that came out in 2022 from a professor, Tim Stockwell, at the University of Victoria in Canada. And he studied 107 previously published studies on alcohol involving almost 5 million study participants, okay? And what he found was that the studies claiming that alcohol was good for your heart were either skewed or biased. And as he dug in a little further, he realized that the people who were funding these studies had ties to the alcohol industry and to alcohol organizations. So let that be a wake-up call. There was also a very famous 60 Minutes television show episode back in 1991. And in that episode, which was watched by 33 million Americans, this is way before, cable TV and the internet was the main thing where people actually watched the news. 33 million people watched this episode where a French scientist who also owned a vineyard claimed that alcohol could be good for the heart. And the 60 Minutes journalist, his name was Morley Schaefer, at the end of this segment, he poured a glass of wine and held it up to the camera and said, "So the secret to longevity and eternal youth might be in this glass. Cheers." And then he drank from it. The very next day, red wine sales spiked by 40%. American Airlines reportedly all sold out of red wine because all the passengers were ordering it. And over the next 2 years, alcohol sales or red wine sales rose by 38%. That is incredible. It was almost like the whole of American society was like, yes, we've got the evidence.
Finally, a permission slip.
We've got my permission slip. Let me drink this poison. I kind of know deep down that it's not good for me, but now I've got this proof that it is. So yeah, let's go to town. And of course, that's created devastating effects over the past 3 or 4 decades.
It is interesting when you start to look at where these studies are coming from, who's performing these studies, what the interests are and the conflicts of interest are. It's a shame, though, that we can't look at studies, whether it relates to this or other facets of life, without being incredibly skeptical about the credibility of said research and study.
Yeah, that's the world that we live in, sadly. I've been researching alcohol now for 10 years. I've been alcohol-free since 2010. Not one drink since 2010. So I'm well researched on this. And I can say with great conviction, there is so much bias and so much influence from big alcohol, and that's the liquor companies. Organizations, foundations, they try to get board seats, they try to influence the studies. It is astounding. Here's the reality in my research. No amount of alcohol is good for us. We know this deep down, okay? And yet we polish, we slant, we change, we shift, we involve ourselves in these studies, and we try to like create this perception that it could be good for us. And then we cling on to this idea that it's good for us. And we go ahead drinking it. But what I submit is, why are we trying to cling on to this thing? Most of the time, it doesn't taste that good. When we first had a sip of alcohol back when we were a kid, we probably went ooh and spat it out. So it's an acquired taste. But what has been acquired is this cultural conditioning of good times while we're drinking it, and it's necessary to entertain clients. It's necessary to watch the NFL playoffs. It's necessary to create connection amongst friends. But it's not. It's not. We just remove the alcohol. We learn how to be engaging. We learn how to have fun. And suddenly we get to live life the way that nature intended us to live, which is without intentionally drinking poison.
Do you feel like there's, I know that, well, I don't know actually. Let me ask you. I assumed, and I think I know, that there's certain individuals who have a more challenging response biologically to alcohol, whether it's the way that it affects their brain or their heart or their system, whatever it might be. And I want to talk with you about that. Is that, first of all, is that true? Are there certain people who are more chemically designed that it's going to impact them greater than other people?
The answer is yes. And from what we know about the study of what's called epigenetics, for most of those folks, we can change that genetic expression through lifestyle and environment. So let me just back up a little bit. If alcohol abuse runs in the family, let's just say a father, an uncle, an aunt, a grandmother had an alcohol use disorder. According to the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, you have a 50% increased chance of also experiencing an alcohol use disorder. Okay, so that is true. There is a genetic increase.
I mean, but what you said doesn't fully explain. So because that could just be based on what you observed as a child. And so you just assume that's correct behavior. And so you're just mimicking behavior, not necessarily genetic. So is there a differentiation between the two?
Yeah, some people are using that as a reason for their drinking. Oh, my dad was an alcoholic, so it runs in the family, and that's why I'm drinking. And they don't actually have the genetic predisposition to alcohol. And so they're just blaming it on their genetics, their father, their grandfather. Then, of course, there are people who do have an expression of gene where any amount of alcohol will set them off the rails, more so than someone who doesn't have that. However, from what we now understand about epigenetics, we can take people who, let's just say, for the sake of this argument, have that genetic predisposition to being affected by alcohol more than someone else. We can now have them do healthy things, focus on their sleep. We can have them expose themselves to morning sunlight. We can have them practice appreciation instead of expectation. We can put them in a community of like-minded people who are committed to their growth, conscious communication, put them in a gym with 6 guys who've got six-packs for 90 days. Nutritionists, put them in a new environment where people support their choice to be alcohol-free and to get the body that nature intended and to exercise and to eat well, and the expression of their genes will change. In other words, you can literally stop this genetic predisposition to alcohol by simply changing your habits, lifestyle, and your environment. Now, you can't change your genetic code, but you can change the expression of those genes. And that comes in through lifestyle and environment.
Let's see. So James Clear, Charles Duhigg talk about habits, right? And how you can overcome certain habits. And I guess my question is with regards to alcohol use, I'm sure it just becomes habitual at some point. And what I'm hearing you say, when you change the expression of those genetics, what you're saying is you're changing the response to a feeling of wanting to have a drink or wanting to have multiple drinks. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and that comes from changing your habits, just like Charles C. Duhigg from The Power of Habit and James Clear from Atomic Habits, yes. So if you change your habits, you can change the expression of your genes, which now reduces or eliminates cravings for alcohol, which then changes the expression of your genes, which then means that if you have children later on, the likelihood that they will have a genetic predisposition to alcohol use disorder will either be significantly reduced or extinguished entirely.
What is the genetic predisposition? How does that manifest? Is that you are just more, you have a deeper craving of it? Does that mean that your body reacts as if it's more potent than somebody else? What is the actual genetic expression, the default genetic predisposition to alcohol abuse?
Well, one of the biggest receptors in our brain is called dopamine. And so when someone who has a predisposition to alcohol drinks alcohol, the dopamine receptors are so sensitive that they light up like the 4th of July. It's literally like fireworks going off. And so someone else who doesn't have that genetic predisposition might drink, and it might just be like a little kid's playground by comparison, right? They're not having these huge, big fireworks displays, but the dopamine receptors, certainly they're triggered, but they're not going off to the degree that someone with a genetic predisposition to alcohol has. And then, of course, what happens over time is that the dopamine receptors then get dulled because of excessive use. And so now that person requires more alcohol to be able to get the same 4th of July response. And so that's when they get stuck in this cycle of like, I need a drink, I have to have a drink. Then they experience pain, depression, stress, anxiety. They need a drink to try to get the dopamine being released and firing off. But because it's been dulled over many years of use, now all of a sudden they need to drink more, and then this becomes just a horrific perpetual cycle. What we do at Alcohol Free Lifestyle, where we help high achievers to rewire their mindset around alcohol, is we help folks to get their dopamine receptors firing off through holistic activities and things like exercise, sunlight, considering yourself a professional sleeper, practicing gratitude, journaling, conscious communication, being growth-minded, being around positive, empowering people as opposed to people who are constantly bringing you down. And what they've found is that your dopamine receptors can return to a more, let's say, base level of efficiency, whereby suddenly, instead of chasing pleasure in the moment, in the short term, now we experience this fulfillment, which is like a slow release of the dopamine over time. And now we have a much more measured life.
I mean, I personally experienced that when I stopped drinking so heavily in a couple 2.5 years or so ago, is just stepping outside and walking around the yard or going on a drive or having a podcast with somebody like yourself. Like, everything seemed to become a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more alive, instead of this like dull existence. And the only way that I was hitting whatever I needed was through having a drink.
Yeah. Well, I would submit you're experiencing fulfillment there. It's like the slow release of the many pleasurable things in your life. It's not chasing short-term pleasure like you're going somewhere and you get a 2-hour hit and then a crash. It's looking back and going, wow, look at what I'm doing. I'm living a good life here. I've got my family. I've got this podcast. I'm growing. You know, Tony Robbins, he talks about these things called the 6 human needs. And he talks about if the 6 human needs are met, we have a great life. We feel fulfilled. And the needs are certainty. We need some level of certainty. Uncertainty. We want a little bit of uncertainty and variety in life. Growth. Are we growing? Like, are we stretching? Love and connection, okay, which is being connected to people. Significance, which is, do people admire us? And, you know, do we feel significant in our community? And then contribution, which is, am I contributing to society and helping people? And I would submit you are, Ryan, because you have this amazing podcast, you're interviewing guests, you're putting it out, you're supporting people. And that's just publicly. I'm sure privately behind closed doors, you're also contributing to your family. And if most
Depends on if I'm mad at my kids or not and what they might say on any given basis, but sure, generally.
if most of those 6 human needs, if not all of them, are being met, I would suggest you have a fulfilling life. Most folks who are using alcohol are using it to reduce stress and anxiety or to procrastinate or to numb themselves. And I would suggest if they looked in at those 6 human needs, that probably some or many are missing. And now we're using that alcohol as a crutch. We're using it to numb the pain of being ourselves because we feel lack in our life. And then, of course, we get stuck in this vicious cycle. We convince ourselves that it's fun, that it's no big deal. But really, many of us are walking around using alcohol as a crutch.
So then that leads to the question, how do you begin to find fulfillment when you have been using this crutch and sedating yourself with alcohol abuse? Because that's significantly easier in the short term to get the dopamine release, to detach from whatever might be bringing you anxiety. How do you begin to replace that with a level of fulfillment in these 6 needs you're talking about?
It starts with the choice. The choice is you got to choose to embark upon this journey. Just like Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz, she started the hero's journey. She didn't want to go on the journey. The tornado came. She found herself in a strange place. She now had to meet people who were scary at first. She had to overcome her own fear. She had to create allies. Then there were more obstacles. Then she had a breakthrough. Then there were more obstacles. Then there was a huge obstacle, and she had to level up and rise to a higher standard to be able to finally prevail and get back home. That's the hero's journey. We see it in every Hollywood movie. We see it in every television series. And I always say, pray for a worthy opponent. And the worthy opponent here is alcohol and your alcohol use. Because when you have a worthy opponent, you get to go through that hero's journey and step up, and you get to find something from within and attack it. On a more practical level, what I would suggest is once you've made that choice that you're going to go on this journey, surround yourself with like-minded people. Surround yourself with coaches. Surround yourself with people who've already accomplished what it is that you want to accomplish. No Olympic medalist ever won a medal without a coach. Everyone's got coaches. So Michael Jordan had countless coaches. He had a gym coach. He had a mindset coach. He had Phil Jackson, who was his actual coach of the team. So surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and more experienced, who can show you the way. I would put yourselves definitely in a like-minded community. Now, not a community. A community can be going to an AA meeting. Now, I would suggest that AA is not effective. In fact, I've done a lot of studies on this, and it shows that AA's actual reported success rate is less than 10% if you judge success over the course of a year of someone being alcohol-free. It's definitely helped millions of people, no question. I salute it, and I love the mission. However, 9 out of 10 people who attempt it don't get to that 1-year alcohol-free success rate, okay? So when I say get yourself in a community, I don't mean a community like AA, or I mean a like-minded community. So people that you can relate to who are going along the same journey. You referenced that book, The Power of Habit by Charles C. Duhigg, and in that book he says, change becomes probable when you put people in a like-minded community with a common goal. That's when it becomes probable. And then it's really educating yourself on healthy habits. How can you reduce your stress and anxiety that's creating these cravings for alcohol in the first place? How can you go into social situations and have the most fun while being alcohol-free? What are the things you say to people when they're encouraging you to have a drink? We show you how to do that in the book, Clear. There's a whole chapter on what to say to people in those situations. And it's just stay on that hero's journey and pray for the worthy opponent, because you will be called up to a greater level to get there, to get to the end of the road, so to speak.
You know, it's interesting because I really appreciate and respect. It's Joseph Campbell, I think, who originally identified the hero's journey. And what's interesting about part of the path is that there's some sort of existential crisis. You know, maybe it's alcohol abuse, maybe somebody gets a DUI or gets into a car wreck, or the breakdown of the marriage like it was in my case. So there's this existential crisis. And then by solving or working towards solving and going on this journey, that existential crisis, they actually end up solving the internal crisis, which is not the drinking is not the problem. The problem is what led to the drinking, what leads to the behavior. And if you aren't willing to address that, then you're going to replace alcohol with drugs or pornography or other sedation and distraction methods instead of actually solving the internal crisis that's going on.
Yes, yes. In my situation, Ryan, I did a lot of, I guess you could call it therapy, but I did a lot of personal development workshops. So I did landmark education, I did some Tony Robbins, I got myself a coach, a mindset coach. I took myself out of environments where I was drinking in a bar with friends, and I put myself into a charity where I trained for a half marathon, and I raised money for charity so I could try to activate that giving part of me, which had been dulled for many, many years. And, it wasn't always pleasant. I really salute and acknowledge anyone who's willing to go there, because when you do the internal work, then everything external starts to get better. But it often feels very challenging, doesn't it? I'm sure that was the case for you. It kind of feels like maybe you're running through rose bushes and you're getting thorns and you're getting bloodied and you're like trying to get through and you're trying to understand why your mother loved you too much or not enough, or why you are envious of people, or why you get irritated by certain things when other people don't get irritated by that. But when you get out the other side of those rose bushes and you're all bloodied and you got thorns, it's kind of like that scene from the Shawshank Redemption movie, where Andy Dufresne climbs through a football field of crap and comes out at the other end, and he's like got his victory stance there with the rain coming down, and the hero's journey, he gets to the other side. What did you do, Ryan? Like, what was your hero's journey trying to get through and do that personal development work?
Well, I mean, I'm still on it. I don't ever want it to sound as if that I've solved the riddle and the temptations and everything are done and over with. I'm still on that journey. Just like I think anybody can probably attest to, it's been through it. But I think it's a lot of what you said. It's finding purpose in the work that I do. It's finding purpose in raising my kids and being a good example. I got heavily involved with training and jujitsu and working out, a lot more journaling and reflection dedicated on a daily basis to those things. Sitting in discomfort and pain of mistakes and past experiences and just letting it just be what it is. There's been a lot to it, and there's more to it as well that will come.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's even when we think we're at the end of the journey, we're actually still on the journey, aren't we? Because we're always growing, evolving, and changing.
Yeah. I do have a question, though, about I heard one time one of my most controversial guests, his name is Wes Watson, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially he had made the comment that being an addict is a superpower, and that if you can take that ability to fixate, the ability to be focused and hyper obsessive on a thing and direct it towards a positive behavior and a positive outcome, that you have an advantage over other people who might not have that same type of personality. What are your thoughts on something like that?
I'm in alignment with that idea in theory, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of folks that have OCD, ADD, ADHD. The challenge is, can you harness that into positive things? So if you can, I would agree with Wes that is a superpower. You could look at that as a superpower. And a lot of folks who come to me, they're high achievers. Like, they are high achievers in their life. They've got multi-million-dollar businesses. They've got 3 kids. They've overachieved. They've married a trophy wife, if you like a very beautiful woman, or they've got on the outside, they seemingly have a great marriage. They've succeeded in many areas of their life, but they haven't been able to overcome this one thing, which is alcohol. And then when they do, when they're able to steer that focus away from alcohol onto alcohol-free living, it's amazing how much their businesses explode. They reconnect with their wife. They're more present with their children. They experience phenomenal growth, which was maybe being suppressed because of their alcohol habits. So I'm in alignment with what Wes said. I'm not in alignment with many other things that Wes has said, but in that regard, I subscribe to that theory.
I mean, my biggest concern with that, and I think we're in agreement about some of the things that have been said, but my biggest concern with that is, are you just replacing your desire for dopamine or your desire to escape with something that we would generally consider healthier? So, for example, if you spend 3 to 4 hours at the gym every day, it's no surprise to me that you're going to get fit and strong and big and you're going to look good, of course. But are you actually doing any work, or are you just replacing one addiction with another that we just generally consider healthier?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that, other than to say, let's just say that you do have an addictive personality. There's 2 ways you can do this to get a favorable outcome, right? You could say, okay, I've got an addictive personality, so now I'm going to put it into my relationship, to conscious communication, to growth, to being in the gym 3 hours, to eating well. And I would submit that that is 100 times better than the alternative of going deep with alcohol or drugs and suppressing yourself. So in that sense, I would go, okay. But also I would say, why not simultaneously, as you're doing that, explore why you have an OCD personality. Explore why you're so compulsive. Do the work to understand that. So I don't think it's like it's an or. Why can't it be an and? Sure, go deep in working out, but try to understand what is driving this behavior. Because as good as you're going to be in one area, probably for someone who's manic like that, they're going to be neglecting something over here. So the perfect outcome, I would suggest, is funneling that energy, that obsessiveness into health, wealth, love, and happiness, and not compromising any of them. And I think if you can get those 4 pillars right, equally, health, wealth, love, happiness, then you have a much more measured and much more fulfilling life, as opposed to focusing on one and the other 3 disintegrate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, because what I've seen, I mean, for every man, I don't know, I'm just assuming, but for every man who maybe has had a breakdown in his marriage because of alcohol abuse, I could find as many, if not more, who have broken down their marriages because they have a work addiction, you know? So we would say, well, working is better than alcohol. I would agree with that, but I just would hate for people to think that, hey, you just replace your addiction with a healthy one and you're solved. Like you're cured, and you're not.
It's a great point, Ryan, which is important to do what they call the work. It's important to do personal development, do therapy. My wife and I, every 2 weeks, we have marriage counseling. Not because anything is inherently wrong, but because mostly it's great. And we stay in the conversation. But sometimes these little grievances can come up. And so we have a coach who walks us through a 75-minute session every 2 weeks, and we get on a call and we sit together and we have a Zoom call with this coach, and we air any grievances that we've got, any energy leaks, and we talk about it and we stay in the conversation. And because of that, I would describe my marriage as a 9 out of 10. There's problems sometimes, they arise, but then we talk about it, we talk it through. I've had a weekly coach for 25 minutes for the last 2 years. I've done 100 sessions. He just told me, my coach just the other day, that I've actually completed 100 sessions, which was pretty amazing. And he's with Landmark Education, and that's a personal development program. And 25 minutes every Wednesday, 3 o'clock, he calls me, I get on the phone, and I talk about things that I'm pissed off about, irritated. He asks me where I've created miracles in my life, what's going great, what do I feel like's not going great. He asks me questions. We reposition these perceptions of good and bad in our minds, and then we create an action plan, and they go out, and I put it into action for the next week. You know, I go to seminars. I went to Tony Robbins' Date with Destiny in West Palm Beach, Florida in December. I've gone and done ayahuasca. I've done a silent meditation, Vipassana, 10-day silent meditation. These are the kind of things that I do. I like to stay in the conversation, right? And be committed to personal growth. And it sounds like, Ryan, you kind of delved into that somewhat and maybe have a routine on that as well.
Yeah, I would say that, and I think I need to probably take more of a page out of your playbook, at least to some degree, is that it's easy for me to get caught up in the physical realm. And I do enjoy the physical realm. I do enjoy working out. I do enjoy training. I enjoy jujitsu. I have other physical challenges that I want to complete this year, and those are all good things. But I do need to make sure I'm very aware of looking into my mental and emotional health in addition to my physical health. But I naturally gravitate towards that side of things.
Yeah, at the expense of gravitating towards your mental growth?
I would say I wouldn't say at the expense of, but well, yeah, sure, at the expense of, in lieu of. I'm like, well, I'm doing this, so I'm good. And maybe neglect some of the mental and emotional side of things.
May I offer a suggestion?
I would love it. Yeah, and I think it'd be helpful for the guys listening too.
Lean into what I refer to as personal development. And what I mean is lean into exercising the mind and exploring the mind. You clearly are fit and healthy, and you've leaned into your physical health, right? Nutrition, exercise. Hire a coach, a therapist, go and do a personal development program, and create consistency around it. And what I mean by that is, get on a scheduled call weekly or every other week or monthly. Go to a program or a personal development program in person where it's 3 or 4 days and that's the only thing you do. And go deep and go into it. And then afterwards, stay consistent, stay in the conversation. Because you clearly go into the gym and you exercise the bicep muscle, right? And when you go into the gym, when you lift a weight, the muscle's not growing in that moment. You're breaking the muscle fibers down, right?
Sure, right.
And then it repairs and you rest it and it comes back bigger and stronger. Well, the same thing I would submit for you, Ryan, in terms of your mental health. Getting in the conversation is the equivalent of breaking the muscle down. It doesn't feel great because now you've got to confront past choices that you've made. Maybe you have resentments with family members or former romantic partners or friends or just things in life. And now you've got to air those things out. And now you've got to talk it through and you've got to put yourself under a microscope. And that's
right.
Challenging and that feels uncomfortable. But if you don't, you might go through the rest of your life with a great body and feeling good with good nutrition and being in the gym, and that's definitely helps. But maybe there's just this little energy drip in your mind that you never even verbalize, but it's compromising your quality of life. And instead of you feeling like a 9 out of 10, maybe you feel like a 7 out of 10. And then that drips into other areas of your life, like your relationship with your kids, your relationship with romantic partners and friends and colleagues and your listeners on this podcast. So again, it's the hero's journey, Ryan. And in order to overcome the worthy opponent, you actually have to take that first step on the journey. And then I would suggest for you and for your listeners, it's really getting a great coach, a therapist, and just being willing to do the work.
I also think, as I'm hearing you say this, that it's about doing the work that is uncomfortable for you. We're more than happy to explore the veins that we're comfortable with or we're familiar with, and we think, okay, well, I've got it because I'm doing good things. But are you really looking in the places that you are uncomfortable looking? And that's, I think, where I need to look more in my life.
And I really acknowledge you for having the self-awareness regarding that, because most people don't. And most people aren't willing to go there because it's uncomfortable. It's like you're looking at the rose bushes and you're choosing to go and run through the rose bushes and get the thorns and get bloodied, right? You're choosing it. I remember
hoping something's on the other side. I mean, that's the reality. You're hoping, you're optimistic that there is, but you don't know for sure. But you're optimistic and hopeful it is.
My experience is that there's a rainbow There's a rainbow there. It's beautiful. I can tell you, I went to Irvine, California back in 2017, and I did this 5-day personal development program. It was me and 15 other people. And on the third day, I was standing up in front of these 15 people who were seated in chairs in this hotel conference room, and they were asking me questions. And I started to feel like I was going to cry. And I grew up in Australia, and I'm 49 years old, and I was like 44 at the time. And we're kind of very alpha male kind of guys, don't cry kind of energy, right? And I'm standing there and I could feel myself getting emotional. And then I started to weep and sob. And I'm thinking to myself, oh God, if my Australian friends back home could see me now, they'd be like throwing dead fruit and vegetables at me going, shame, shame, shame. What are you doing, you pussy? Grow up, for God's sake. What are you doing? Oh, get out of there. You're doing this crazy American guru self-development program. Run now, run now. I'll meet you at the pub. I'll have a beer waiting for you. You know, that was kind of like the thoughts I was having. And I just remember breaking down and just crying. And then one person got up and hugged me, and then another person got up and hugged me, which like made me feel even more awkward. And they're like, "We love you, James. We love you, James." And I'm thinking, oh, this is not who I am. This is painful. And it was. It was painful. It was excruciating. And I had an incredible breakthrough because of that. An incredible breakthrough. Before that, I realized that I was envious of other people's success. I wasn't happy with my mother and father and their divorce. I was holding on to a resentment regarding them, and that showed up in my adult life, in my romantic relationships, because my mother wore the pants in the relationship with my father. That showed up in my adult life as me treating women almost like a sport. And so I was very good at, let's say, creating seduction and romance with women, but I was lousy at creating love and intimacy and having a long-term relationship. And, you know, I was frustrated with that. And so in that program, I had to really look at myself and identify what was driving those types of behaviors. And it all came to fruition on that third day, standing in front of 15 people, crying in front of them and being hugged and being told that they love me. And I'm thinking to myself, love me? They don't love me. Like, they've only known me 3 days. Like, what are they talking about? So there was this level of skepticism and objection and rejection of it at the same time. But I have to say, from that moment on, it really did break me open. And now I've softened as a man in the sense that I'm not so hard or ruthless or kind of black and white. Now I'm actually quite more empathetic and open. And that really shows up in my business, because I have this business that helps people to stop drinking alcohol. And you know, we have high achievers, CEOs and executives and physicians and doctors and attorneys and lawyers, and they come into this program and I'm on coaching calls with them and they're pushing up against me, right? And they're lashing out and they're fighting this thing that not drinking alcohol. But because I went through that personal development and I cried in front of 15 people, and because I opened up, I'm now more empathetic and not so hard. I'm definitely the opposite of Wes Watson, who would probably call you a little pussy and grow up, right?
He absolutely would say that.
And so now I'm able to like be much more like a chameleon, where I can go into any environment and adapt my energy to be as effective a leader as I possibly can, to be a great husband, to be a great father, to be a great coach. So all of that is a long way of saying it's going to feel awkward, but you just got to lean into that resistance. And every successful person knows that sometimes it feels like you're standing on the edge of a cliff and you look down and there are rocks below, but you got to take that leap anyway and just trust that the safety net will appear. And it always does.
And not only trust in that, but also, to your point, being in that like-minded community, because people are further out ahead of you. So even though you might not feel amazing in the moment or that there's silver lining at the end, they can tell you there is, and you can lean on that because they've been through exactly what you're going through. And I think that's one of the powers of having that like-minded community.
Yes. And I would suggest you're not going to get it by going to a traditional AA meeting. You might be sitting next to a 19-year-old meth addict who's holding up a gas station. How can you relate to that person? Of course, you want the best for that person. But if you're a 20, 30, 40, 50-something-year-old man or woman and you got kids and you got a business, you can't relate to that type of energy. You can support that person, but there's no relatability there, which is why it's so important to get into a like-minded community. And, I'm a business owner. I like to hang out with other business owners. So, our program helps business owners, high achievers, growth-minded folks to stop drinking. We're not letting the 19-year-old meth addict come into our program as much as I want to support that person.
I mean, I can definitely relate with what you're saying, because I did go to meetings and I found myself, maybe some judgment, if I'm being honest, but it was hard for me to connect, because there was two people I really did connect with, but it was because they were like me. They were business owners. They were about my age. They were both men. They were both doing fairly well on the outside, but the rest, I'm like, I don't even know, like, that the world you're talking about has nothing to do with me. And it was very hard to connect with those people. But again, I didn't want to be judgmental. Those people do need to be supported, but I can stand behind what you're saying on a personal experience. Well, I know you're pressed for time. I know you're about to travel and things like that. Can you just let the guys know where to connect with you? You've got the Project 90. You've got other programs available. And I want guys who are struggling to be able to know where to turn for a resource that truly works and is proven to work.
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, well, we have a flagship 90-day stop drinking program, which is called Project 90. You can find details at alcoholfreelifestyle.com. I also have a book that's called Clear, a neuroscience-based approach to help high achievers finally break free from alcohol without AA, rehab, or willpower. And you can get details there at alcoholfreelifestyle.com/clear. It's also available where any online books are sold. And then my Instagram page, at James Swanwick, I do a lot of stuff there which helps folks like your listeners to rethink the drink, so to speak. So how to reduce drinking, how to stop entirely. And I'm very happy for folks to send me a direct message there, and I very happily chat with you and send you some free resources as well. So yeah, look, I've had a life with alcohol and a life without, and I can tell you that without is far better in so many ways. Clarity, focus, energy, connected relationship, good health. Doesn't mean that I don't experience troubles and stress and anxiety, but when you're alcohol free, you now have the tools to handle that stress and anxiety and those troubles much better. And anyone who decides to embark upon the hero's journey, I salute you and acknowledge you.
James, we'll sync it all up. Thank you so much for joining me today. The work you're doing is invaluable. So I'm actually interested for myself as well, just to kind of get refreshers and new ideas and new insights. That would be helpful for me too. So we'll sync it all up. James, thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Ryan.